With that in mind, I want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining today's webinar, Managing Uncertainty and Change. Today's session will explore how uncertainty and change impact workplace well-being, communication, and team dynamics, and most importantly, what we can do to support ourselves and what we can do to support others when we're going through periods of transition. So whether you're a team leader, whether you're a leader or team member, my hope is that you'll leave with practical strategies and insights that can help foster healthier, more supportive, and more resilient workplaces. I also will encourage you to participate through chat. You could use the chat feature today, as you can see. If you want to share a thought, comment, reflection, or when I'm asking questions, if you want to answer them, you can use the chat feature today. All right. So I just want to go over some of the learning outcomes. So by the end of today's session, participants will be able to explain how change and uncertainty impacts employee well-being and performance. We'll talk about identifying common physiological, psychological, and behavioral responses to change. We'll talk about the bridges transition model to understand how individuals experience transition. However, there are many different types of transition models, but we're choosing to go over the bridges transition model. And then we will demonstrate practical strategies to support resilience and psychological safety during change. So before we begin, we're going to start talking about what are some changes that impact well-being in the workplace. So as you can see in 2026, there's been a lot of changes. So this list that I'm showing you is not exhaustive. It does not cover everything that's all the changes in the workplace, but these are the common ones for 2026. Employee well-being is shaped by a combination of internal workplace changes and broader external pressures. Internally, we are seeing rapid changes such as the rapid adoption of AI. So increasing concerns. So the rapid adoption of AI, as you know, there's been, a lot of companies and organizations are asking people to use AI quickly. And there's a lot of considerations to think about the ethical usage of AI, or, how do we even use AI to abide by privacy and what's the policy in the organization? So there's a lot of quick changes happening around AI. Increasing concerns around workforce security. So it's that constant fear of layoffs, job loss, and job insecurity can create a chronic or toxic cycle of chronic stress, reduced engagement, and overwork as employees expend mental energy worrying about their future while taking on unsustainable workloads to prove their value, right? Because you're working with less people, but you're having to do more work in your role, which then creates burnout. Workplace burnout in Canada is rising, driven by chronic understaffing, organizational restructuring, and increasing pressures associated with AI adoption. And then we have return to office or return to work mandates or expectations, all of which can affect autonomy, workload, and uncertainty. At the same time, there are significant external factors influencing how employees experience work. So this could include ongoing economic uncertainty, post-pandemic recovery, the cost of living crisis, inflation, and increasing climate-related disruptions. So when we think past COVID, there still have been many things happening since then, right? Because we still have not fully recuperated from COVID. Now we're dealing with the cost of living crisis, and then we have inflation. There's a war going on. So all of these things are impacting our well-being at work, and we're having to respond quickly or react quickly. That could really impact your well-being. When combined, All of these factors can create a higher baseline of stress and uncertainty, which can impact focus, resilience, and overall well-being at work. So understanding this broader context is important because it helps us see that employee responses to change are often shaped by pressures both inside and outside of the workplace. So the changes that I mentioned in the workplace are conditioned from work, but people again are also experiencing their own. Maybe they're going through their own life transitions as well, on top of what's happening at work and those external conditions. So there's a lot for people to deal with in this world of 2026, the year of 2026. All right. So just to begin, I wanted to invite everyone to participate in a quick reflection activity. So you can use the chat function. In the chat, type one word that describes how people typically respond to uncertainty or change. There are no right or wrong answers, just your observations and experiences. So just really quickly, if there's change happening either in your workplace or externally, what's one word that describes how you respond to it? Okay, so I'm just going to read some of the answers here. So we have anxiety, fear, urgency. Yes, urgency is one of them. It's that we have to react quickly. Sometimes there's hesitation. Yep, absolutely, because we're not sure what the change is and how it's going to affect us. Panic. Panic is one of them. Again, fear of that uncertainty, fear, wonder, right? So it could also be, oh, I'm curious to know how things will be different. So that may or may not always be a negative reaction to it. So a lot of fear and anxiety. Someone put defensiveness, which is interesting as well, right? And the defensiveness, I'm a little bit curious about. So is that defensiveness because I'm just things were going well the way they were, or someone put angry about the assumed negativity? Yeah. Yes, because people also might think a change is always negative when it could be a positive change. Job security is another one, right? So something that people be thinking about. So, okay, we're going to maybe downsize. So will I be impacted by it? Is my job secure? Yeah, great. Some great answers in the chat. Thank you so much. And then these responses remind us that change affects people differently, right? Because some people love to go through quick changes, and some people might need a little bit more time or understanding to see how it would impact them or to better prepare for the change. Our reactions are often shaped by communication, support systems, workload is super important because if there will be a change, how will that impact my workload and how can I sustain myself in my role? And personal circumstances, as I mentioned, right? There could be things, maybe you have two people on the same team, but maybe one person might be going through, for example, I don't know, a divorce and then another person is not, and maybe their reaction to that change will be completely different because there's external things that are causing stress. And then, so yeah, we have some humor in the chat just around, who really embraces change, right? So at what age are we really embracing change? Well, if we actually know about it happening. All right. And then the common responses to change. So it's really important to understand, again, this is not exhaustive, but change it does impact us at different levels. It can affect many aspects of workplace well-being and performance. And when people don't know what to expect, the brain naturally tries to predict risk and regain a sense of control. So going back to the comment of like, we're kind of hardwired to think, okay, what's going to happen next? So without knowing that, that can increase stress levels and emotional fatigue. Some common impacts include difficulty concentrating, reduced motivation, especially when you're not sure of the root cause of the change, right? So if you're not being told that information and people are just talking behind the scenes, it could create reduced motivation for you to do your work well, if you're not sure. Increased anxiety, withdrawal or disengagement. There could be tension within teams because in some workplaces, especially if they're going through layoffs, certain people are still in their positions, whereas other people were let go. So there's a lot of tension of who was let go and why. um, Burnout or exhaustion. Sometimes it's, maybe we're changing leadership, right? So maybe we went from one leader to a different leader, or we've gone through different managers, or we've gone through different colleagues. But if it's happening frequently and often, it can create chronic stress. And then it could eventually lead to burnout. So I'm not saying that those are negative reactions per se to change or uncertainty. It's really normal human reactions to uncertainty, right? So really, what I've just listed there are things that, as we're hardwired to think of what are the next steps, we're also trying to prepare ourselves and safeguard ourselves to navigate the terrain when we don't know, right? So that's why it tends to go to those like difficulty concentrating and tension, etc. So what I want you to do for a second is think about a time when your workplace experienced significant change. What challenges did people seem to experience most? So I'm just going to pause here for a minute, but think about a time when your workplace experienced significant change. What challenges did people seem to experience most? So if you can put your answers in the chat, I'd love to hear from you. And it doesn't have to be your current workplace, it could be your previous workplace. Okay, so someone said lack of information about the change. Yeah, yeah, a shutdown. So it could definitely be, the person just doesn't really trust anyone anymore. So they're kind of shutting down. They don't know how to react. Lack of connection and continuity, yes, especially if we're talking about, for example, like let's just say it is rapid adoption of AI and we're working more on our own independently. They might not be as connected, for example, to teams or even the larger organization. So they don't really know what's going on, or maybe they've just not been getting the messaging. So they're being siloed from the communications. Overwhelmed with new tasks, absolutely. Because maybe, for example, they've let go of someone who does a role that you don't have the expertise in, and they're asking you to take part in that role. Absolutely. So that's overwhelming, especially if you're not taught how to do it. You have to figure it out on the spot. Questioning the reason for change led to inaction, so that's super unfortunate. Frustrated things didn't work out the way they did. Short notice about the change, which is a really hard one, right? Because if, sometimes leaders aren't told without a lot of notice, so they have to quickly tell people as fast as they know. And sometimes there is a short turnaround time, so it's quick adjustments. Longing for what was, absolutely. There's like a grieving period, right? Or maybe there was a vision of your team who's been working together for a while of what you would hope to achieve. And now it's changed. Maybe your team members have changed. So maybe that could change your vision or change the way you do your work. Absolutely. Role clarity, super important, right? So even if we start new roles, for example, is it very clear what that person's doing, the scope of their work? If people don't understand why the need and the change impacted them, performance impact, they did not have the tools or knowledge. And someone else says, you know what, they don't mind changes at all at work. It can make life exciting. So that's great, right? It's great when you have, so it's great when you have that. So then how do we balance it out when we have people that are fearful of change, and then we might have one or two people that are okay with it? So how do we balance those tensions? And then the waiting to see what will be the impact on the workload, absolutely. And then not involving, but informing. Yes, so this is a huge one, right? How do we ensure that we consider these changes in a way that actually engage people that are most impacted by the change? Extra work asked with no bonuses or overtime, yes. And then lack of rapport, right? Because, for example, you could be working, with a certain team for a long period of time and you've developed that rapport, and then maybe now you're working with new management and you don't have that rapport anymore. So, or maybe it's within the team dynamic. There's so many things that can change. Fantastic answers. Thank you so much for showing the diversity of responses um, to how people experience change. So I'm just going to show you here some common responses to change. But again, people respond to change in very different ways. And it's important to recognize there's no one single correct reaction. I'm just showing the most common responses. Some individuals are able to adapt quickly, especially if they have experience with change. They feel informed or they trust the process. So remember, we are also carrying the baggage from other workplaces, right? We might be new in an organization, but we've experienced change before. And maybe it was positive, so great. I might have that perspective about it, or maybe it's negative and I'm bringing that into the workplace, right? It depends on how it was dealt with, how it was, the messaging was given. Others may need more time, more information, or more reassurance before they can fully engage with what is happening. So, common emotional and behavioral responses can include worry or anxiety, which often is linked to uncertainty about what comes next. Resistance, which can sometimes be a protective response rather than opposition. Frustration, especially when change feels unclear or outside of someone's control. So that was mentioned in the chat around being informed versus not involving, especially when it affects your work, right? Could affect your workload or the way a process is done. And if you were just told afterwards, that could be really frustrating. Fatigue, particularly when change is ongoing or happening frequently. So I've seen this in workplaces where it's like we're doing this process today, and then next week it's a different process, and then someone new comes in and it's a different. So we just keep changing it, and everyone's confused. The people who work there, maybe the clients that are receiving the service or participants. So it does get confusing. Fear of the unknown, which is one of the most common drivers of stress and change, and sometimes reduced confidence as people adjust to new expectations or ways of working. So it's important to emphasize that these are not signs of weakness or negativity. They just reflect that very normal human need for clarity, stability, support, and connection. As leaders and colleagues are recognizing this, it helps shift our responses from why are they resisting to what do they need to feel more supported and informed. So rather than, blaming or saying, well, why are they being resistant? My messaging was so clear to what is it they need to feel more supported and informed because we know it's a lot for people to deal with change. So that shift is key to navigating change more effectively and compassionately. Psychological safety is so important when we talk about change. It's a key foundation for effective teamwork, especially during times of change. It refers to an environment where team members feel safe to speak up without fear of negative consequences. So people would feel comfortable asking questions when they're unsure, so knowing that they're able to do that, right? People are always, employees are taking cues from their work environment. So are they able to ask questions when they're not sure? Can they share ideas even if they're not fully developed? Can they express concerns or ask questions about the change? Can they admit mistakes without fear or blame of punishment? Can they speak honestly even when their views are different from others? So that's how we're defining psychological safety. Um, and it's important because there's this uncertainty around, hesitation and awareness, right? People are really, thinking about, well, I'm not really sure why we're doing this. There's this awareness to the risk of the change. But when psychological safety is present, employees are more likely to engage in learning, so be part of the conversation, raise issues early before they become problems. So that would be in a situation where there was time to actually have a conversation first to get input to then maybe help with the change if there's time, and then actively contribute to solutions rather than withdrawing. Without it, people may stay silent, avoid responsibility, or disengage, which can slow down adaptation and increase stress within teams. So ultimately, psychological safety supports both performance and well being, making it a critical enabler of successful change. What psychological safety does not mean, it does not mean a lack of accountability or a conflict-free zone or constant praise. Sometimes people think it's just being nice and having a conversation or creating an environment where no one's feelings are hurt. But true psychological safety is about fostering comfort with discomfort. So it is not a free pass for poor performance. Accountability and standards remain high. So mistakes are treated as learning opportunities, not excuses. So that would happen on both ends, right? Employees and leaders. And then, so it's not an environment without conflict, right? Because there are environments I've been in where people avoid giving feedback, as an example, but it's really about how do we have healthy, productive disagreement and intellectual friction are actively encouraged. And some of the best ideas actually happen that way, right? Because we need to know root causes of things. It's not about constant praise and validation. Feedback is candid and direct, focusing on growth rather than keeping people comfortable. There is not a guarantee of total comfort because growth requires vulnerability, which often feels risky and uncomfortable. It is a space for constructive problem solving, not consequence-free complaining, right? We want to get to a point of these are the issues. How can we work towards a solution? Or how can we work together towards finding something that would work? And it is not about lowering professional standards. High safety must coexist with high motivation and high performance expectations. So communication during change. So we're going to cover the Bridges transition model here, which I talked about in the opening. The Bridges transition model focuses on the human side of change. There are many transition models. We're choosing to focus on this one today because it focuses on the human side. Um, William Bridges emphasizes that change and transition are not the same thing. Change is external and can happen quickly. So that could be, for example, new systems, that could be restructuring, leadership changes, whereas transition is internal. So the emotional and psychological process people experience while they're adapting. Even positive changes can create uncertainty or stress. Okay. And then so we start off with stage one, which is called the ending here or endings. So the transition begins with letting go of what is familiar. So this was kind of brought up in the chat earlier, but employees may experience sadness over losing routines or relationships, fear, frustration, resistance, so knowing that there's emotions associated with these changes, we then ask that the leaders respond. So at this point, leaders should acknowledge these feelings instead of dismissing them. The second stage is the neutral zone. So this is the in-between stage. So the old way of doing things, for example, is gone, but the new way is not fully comfortable yet. So productivity and morale may temporarily decline. This phase is also when innovation and learning happen. So leaders need to provide communication, right? So this is the change we're working on. This is how we're going to do it. Some reassurance about the change, training which people mentioned, if there's new tasks that are being asked that are in relationship to the scope of their work, what's the training they need to do that task well or within their working day, clarity whenever possible, like how would this impact them at their role at work and or maybe how they process things or the culture even. And then stage three is new beginnings. So employees begin accepting the change and building confidence, and energy and engagement increase as people understand their role, expectations, and the purpose behind the change. So I just almost want to highlight the purpose behind the change because people want to know the why, right? So, if we're saying, well, we're going to adopt this new technology or, we have to do some layoffs. Well, layoffs are because we didn't get the funding allocated to us that we did last year and it's been lower. So unfortunately, we had to make some decisions, right? So just understanding the reasoning behind it really helps. And then the purpose. And then leaders should reinforce successes and celebrate progress. So the final point is organizations often focus heavily on implementing change quickly, but lasting success happens when leaders actively support employees through the transition process. So here's a quick example. If we consider a tech company that lays off 15% of its workforce due to budget cuts, forcing the remaining team to absorb the work while restructuring into smaller groups. So there's the ending, losing, and letting go. So the moment the layoffs are announced, the transition process begins for the remaining employees. The experience employees feel shock, grief, anger, and anxiety. They lose close colleagues, their sense of job security, and their trust in leadership. They also lose their old manageable workloads. So leaders must show empathy and avoid toxic positivity, right? So you can imagine if you've been working alongside someone for 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and you just say, oh, you know what? The new way of doing things will be great. Like we'll move forward and we'll miss this person, but we've got this. But we have to really acknowledge that they've been working alongside that person for X amount of time, right? So it's also important to go through them with their journey to just acknowledge and affirm the pain points. Acknowledge the pain of losing teammates, explain clearly why the layoffs happened, and what the new corporate structure looks like. So that's so important in the communication process, that transparency around the purpose behind it and what the vision is moving forward. And then we have that neutral zone. So the departed employees are gone, but the new restructured workflows are not yet stabilized. So then there's this confusion, and the people that are, we call them survivors or people that are still working there, the guilt peaks here. Staff feel overwhelmed trying to do two jobs at once, or rumors could spread about a second wave of layoffs, causing productivity to drop significantly. So what to do? So in leadership roles, you want to over communicate to rebuild trust, define what tasks should be completely stopped so the remaining staff do not burn out. And then you want to create short-term priorities and hold regular feedback check-ins. So you want to have those check-ins to see, okay, we're going to try it this way. How is this new way of doing things? Just want to make sure it's sustainable for you. And then the new beginning, the remaining team accepts the new reality and aligns with the company's new direction. The experienced employees form new working relationships. They master the streamlined processes, see the company has stabilized financially, and regain confidence within their own roles. And so what needs to be done is clarifying the new team's purpose. And you want to publicly celebrate the milestones achieved by these newer teams. You want to reinforce individual job security by investing in professional development for remaining staff. Because if you've just gone through those layoffs and you're asking people to take on new roles, they want to know they're going to be supported to get the work done. So by providing the training, as an example, you're showing the investment and care that you have for them. And then we get to the communication, which is one of the most important factors in how people experience change. When communication is effective, it can significantly reduce uncertainty and build trust across teams. So during times of change, good communication should include sharing updates regularly, even if there's no major new information to reduce uncertainty. Listening actively so employees feel heard and understood, not just informed. Using clear, direct language. So avoiding jargon or ambiguity that can create confusion, right? Sometimes there's so many acronyms, or sometimes at certain levels in the workforce, there's certain vocabulary that's used that people are not really familiar with. So just make sure that it's very clear what you're trying to get across. You want to be honest about what you know and don't know and what is still evolving. And I think rather than pretending to know if you don't know, is just a good practice to say, we don't currently know, but we're looking into it and we hope to have a response by this time, as an example. And then you want to encourage questions so employees can clarify concerns and feel more involved. Part of psychological safety is always about getting the people most impacted by the change, listening to them up front so that when we're going through, the solution, they're part of that process. If it's possible, if it's during a short turnaround time, things are condensed, but you do want to still give information in a way that's creates psychological safety. Communication during change is not just about delivering information, it's about creating a two-way dialogue. So someone had mentioned before about not just being informed, but how do we actually have a conversation about it? When people feel informed and able to ask questions, they're more likely to trust the process, stay engaged, and adapt more effectively, right? Because the biggest part here is trust. Well, how do I trust what they're saying? Because the last time this happened, we didn't see any, it didn't happen the way that they said it was going to happen. So we want to make sure what we're saying aligns with the plan. And then without clear communication, uncertainty tends to fill the gap, and that can increase anxiety and resistance. And then we have, so one important thing to talk about as well is that it doesn't just share, the responsibility doesn't just fall on leaders, it could also fall jointly on employees. So employees can ask questions respectfully, because again, sometimes when people are giving the message, they're just told to give the message, right? We can't always point fingers and blame. So we want to be fair when we ask questions, asking our whys and how we're asking it. You want to communicate concerns early, right? As soon as we hear about it. So, because instead of me going to my colleague on Teams and having multiple conversations, and then, we're getting all angry and upset, we don't really know what the actual changes are. So as soon as we start hearing about it, to communicate that to the person, maybe it's your leader or manager, so that we can avoid that toxicity of like rumors and gossip. You want to support colleagues, so maybe I'm newer to the team, but I'm working alongside someone who, maybe they're going through this technological change and they've been there for a while and it's harder for them to adjust, as an example. So I need, how can I be there to support them in whatever way I can? And then you want to stay engaged in conversations and updates. You want to read those emails, and you want to understand what the changes are. And small actions from everyone contribute to that stronger workplace of trust and resilience. And then leaders can provide clarity and transparency, acknowledge the stress and uncertainty, create opportunities for dialogue, and model calm and adaptability, right? Because you want to make sure when you're giving out the messaging that we're grounded in our message and that we're calm. Because if we're really, nervous doing our talk about the change, people will pick up on the honesty around that. All right. And then we want to go over some practical strategies that can help support people who are going through the change. So again, I'm going to go over leadership really quickly, but the overall role of leadership is to guide people through uncertainty while maintaining trust, clarity, and engagement. You want to reflect and lead with empathy. So leaders need to be aware of their own reaction to change first, because there might be an assumption that all leaders are okay with change, but maybe they themselves don't even agree to it, but they are the communicators of the change. So empathy helps leaders respond in a way that, so they don't want to ignore their own feelings. They might underestimate employee concerns. So empathy helps leaders respond in a way that feels human, not purely procedural, and it helps build trust and reduces resilience. You want to communicate clearly and often. So, for example, when employees understand what is happening, why is it happening, what comes next, um, it's so important repetition because people rarely absorb the message the first time, right? The first time they might be in shock, they might be in denial. So it's just important to repeat that communication piece of, the what, why, what comes next. And then you want to create stability and confidence. So you can reinforce this by giving some team direction, some presence. Maybe it's going in person or recording a webinar or doing Q&A. Organizational purpose alignment, talking about how it's connected to the purpose of the organization, which will help give a sense of grounding during the transition. You want to recognize and involve employees. Again, as I mentioned, you want to ensure they're included in the process. It also increases ownership, and recognition of past and present effort will help people feel valued even when systems are changing. And then you want to support adjustment over time. So change is not a single event, it happens over time. Employees move at different speeds through adjustment. Leaders need to provide ongoing support, training, and reinforcement rather than expecting immediate adaptation, right? Because that's when we start to force our own expectations onto others, it could lead to tension within the team. So effective leadership in change is about reducing uncertainty, building trust, and supporting people through transition, not just about implementing a new system or process. And then for employees, what they can do to manage change in a healthy and effective way. So change can feel uncertain, but employees are not passive. They have strategies that can help them stay grounded and effective. So you want to remain adaptable and open, even though we know change will bring uncertainty. Flexibility is important. Being open helps employees adjust more quickly rather than resisting no processes or expectations. You want to focus on what you can control. Uncertainty often creates stress when people focus on things outside their control, but you want to look at things like daily tasks, communication, and priorities. You want to use healthy coping strategies. So the first thing you probably want to do, is maybe you want to eat something unhealthy or drink something unhealthy because it is emotionally demanding. But things like, you know what, maybe you want to take a break. Maybe you've just heard about a large change, and then rather than going back to work, maybe you want to take a 10-minute break, or, do something to just acknowledge what you've been told. Maybe it's maintaining routines. It could be seeking support, managing stress to help maintain well-being and performance. It could be exercise, depending on the individual, to decrease the stress. You want to communicate clearly and ask questions. So seeking clarity is so important when things are uncertain. So asking questions can help avoid assumptions and misinformation because you don't want to hear from a colleague what they think. You want to hear the truth from leadership. So for example, like what is known at this stage, or what are some of the options that I do have that can support clarity and alignment. You want to engage in continuous learning and development. So it often involves new skills or ways of working. Being proactive about learning increases confidence and reduces anxiety over time. So learning also helps employees stay relevant and engaged during transitions. Overall, employee resilience during change comes from that clarity, communication, adaptability, and active engagement, and not passive acceptance. So when employees seek information, support each other, and stay open to learning, they're better equipped to navigate uncertainty effectively. There are some practical strategies that individuals can use to build resilience. A key starting point is focusing on, I mentioned, those controllable actions. Um, Again, maintaining routines where possible. Um, You also want to take those breaks to support recovery, which is essential for maintaining energy, focus, and well-being. Staying connected with colleagues is also important, as social support can reduce stress and help people feel less isolated. So you want to practice flexibility, allowing individuals to adapt more easily when plans or expectations shift. So it's hard, right? When we are, it's hard to change when we've said, for example, we've created a plan, we're going to go along this route and go down this pathway. Now we're being told to change. But the more resistant we are, it'll be more difficult for us actually, right? So we really try to be adaptable, knowing that things happen all the time outside that can impact the workplace. And then seeking support when needed, which is really important. So that might be from managers. So maybe maybe you need support around the workload. Maybe you need support around technology because there's so many changes with technology and training. Um, Maybe it's just peer-to-peer support or formal resources, especially around your mental health, right? So maybe things, maybe you need to contact employee assistance program or counselors to talk about how the change is impacting you. This will help you stay grounded and maintain your performance and help you navigate that uncertainty more effectively. So I'm just going to quickly show you a scenario activity. So a workplace is undergoing restructuring, communication has been limited, workloads are increasing, and um, employees are feeling like they're uncertain about future responsibilities. So I have some questions here for you, and you can add them in the chat, but I want you to think about these questions. What challenges might people in this situation experience? So you can just put number one and then your answer. Then number two, what communication approaches would help? So one, the answer, two, your answer. And then three, what actions could improve trust and psychological safety? Again, you put number three. So I'm just going to give you a minute or so if you can please put your answers in the chat. Okay, so far for what challenges might people in this situation experience, we have fear of job loss or increased workload. Absolutely. Excessive workload, job security. Another person also mentioned job security. Um, and then what communication approaches would help? Identify restructuring, clearly explain the reasons why and what the outcome would be, and be realistic. I like that part as well because sometimes people might promise everything, right? But let's be realistic of what we know, um, what we can do, and what can happen. A group meeting or call where people can ask questions live and get answers. So that could be on like a webinar, it could be on a meeting, it could be in a town hall, right? There are many different ways, but absolutely a way to have a conversation and a way to ask questions. Honest and open communications. Yeah. And then, sorry, back to number one about what challenges, what people experience. They said overwhelm and burnout. So we want honest and open communication, communicate early and often, provide reasoning for the change and the impact on them, the what's in it for me. So maybe there's at the organizational level, this is how it's, how we're moving towards this direction. And then at that team level, you can speak to people in a group setting or as individuals about how will impact them in their own roles. Absolutely. Yeah, I like that. And then the third one was what actions could improve trust and psychological safety. So regular communications was one of them. Create spaces for feedback in public and in private. So anonymous ways to give feedback as well. If people are afraid to give feedback. address questions and show meaningful action to feedback. This is so important around the accountability, right? Thank you, I heard that, and how we're going to address this is this way. Or at this current time, we cannot, but we will at phase two, as an example. Regular communication, address issues promptly, leadership visibility and availability. So it's one thing to, go in person one time, but the availability part is important because if people are working different shifts, like morning versus night, remote, hybrid, we want to make sure that people are available to have these conversations. Demonstrated empathy and compassion. Yes, that it's not just, that there are people actually losing their jobs, as an example, or, so if there's restructuring happening, we want to make sure that we're doing it in a human approach. And then early conversations, opportunity to share feedback and ask questions, provide a safe forum to share, listen, confirm that concerns are heard. Yes, we want to not assume that we understood. We want to confirm what we heard. And then validation of employees' concerns. So there's a lot of excellent information. We have a lot of experts as well in the chat, but I'm looking to the chat to see what would work for people, right? What do people want to hear and what has worked for them? So that's fantastic. So that people have some ideas of how to approach changes with that psychological safety in mind. All right. And then we want to talk about supporting mental health during change. So, supporting mental health during change involves both recognizing when someone may be struggling and responding in a supportive, human way. There are several signs that someone may be experiencing difficulty. It could be changes in mood, withdrawal from colleagues or reduced engagement, increased irritability, reduced concentration or performance, and increased absenteeism. So this doesn't necessarily mean something's wrong, but they can indicate that they may need additional support during periods of change. Often effective support starts with simple but important actions like listening without judgment, right? Because your people are going through a hard time. So if you start to say, "Oh, I've been there, I've done that," or you know what, that's not really a big deal, just you'll get over it in a few weeks. We really want to listen what their fears are. Acknowledge challenges rather than minimize them. Encourage healthy boundaries like taking breaks and managing workload. Sometimes it's slowing things down. I know it sounds impossible, but it's like, how can I just take a break to slow the pace down, just to get it through the day, for example. Creating space for open conversation so people feel safe to speak up. And the key is to notice changes early and respond in a supportive, proactive way. So by combining awareness of warning signs with open, empathetic communication, we can better support well-being and prevent issues from escalating during times of change. And then we have our own personal action planning. So I'm just going to pause for a short reflection. So this is not something you need to share with anyone. It's just for you to think about. But one action I can take to better support myself of others during uncertainty is, so I'll just give you a moment to think about that. And there's no right or wrong answer here, just thinking about something practical and realistic that you can do. Okay, so just think about that after we leave the webinar, but it might be something small like asking more questions when things are unclear, maybe during a team meeting, right? So maybe you're also helping your colleagues by doing that. Checking in more regularly with colleagues, focusing on what you can control during change, and managing your own workload and boundaries, right? Because your leader might also be overwhelmed throughout the process. So just telling them, for example, I need some support. It's not, we thought it could be realistic, but I'm feeling overwhelmed. So how can I get some support? Um, so I gave you that moment to reflect. And then just some key takeaways. So to close today's session, there are a few key messages to take away. People experience change differently, as I mentioned. Some may not have a problem with change, and others may have difficulty with the change. It depends on personal circumstances, past experiences, and the support available to them. Communication and psychological safety become even more important during periods of uncertainty. People are more likely to engage positively with change when they're feeling informed, heard, and safe to speak openly. And third, supporting mental health is a shared responsibility. So we want to create a supportive environment which requires ongoing awareness, empathy, and action from both leaders and employees. And then fourth, small and consistent actions like checking in, listening, sharing updates, and offering support can make a meaningful difference during change. And empathy, flexibility, and connection are some of the most important tools we have for helping teams navigate uncertainty effectively. So I just wanted to thank you all for your participation today, and I'm going to leave you with some support, some community supports. So CMHA, we have mental health supports, education, and community resources for employees, families, co-workers, and support networks. So we have mental health education and workshops, counseling and peer support, stress, anxiety, and burnout resources, crisis and community support. So we have a lot of different supports for mental health. Workplace mental health training, we also have, which provides tools to build resilience and support others, even if someone is not personally struggling. And then we have a bounce back program, which is a free skill building program, helping individuals 15 and older to manage mild to moderate anxiety, depression, and stress. And then we have the 988 suicide crisis helpline, which is a free, confidential 24/7 service that provides immediate mental health support via phone or text to anyone in Canada. So those are three there, and I'm sure within your organizations you also have access to a wide variety of supports. Um, and so that's essentially it for today. I wanted to really thank you all for your participation and attendance, and also to Emily for doing an amazing job with interpretation. So I will stay back a few more minutes in case there are any questions, but enjoy the rest of your week and goodbye.